All right, in this video, I'm taking a bit of a risk. Not much of one really, but when you talk about the inner workings of magic, there's a risk of saying too much because what you reveal will either sound absurd or it will be taken in the wrong way. And so I guess how I need to start out this presentation is to say that the concepts presented here are something that a student of magic would have to digest and work with over a number of years so that they can actually begin to deliver the results that we're talking about today. And that result, this is a cool video, right? The Secret of Invisibility, or, and with a question mark, Secret of Invisibility? So what is that about? So there is a great rumor out there that the Rose Cross ritual of the Golden Dawn is an invisibility ritual. And the Rose Cross ritual is published out there, splattered all over the internet. You can get it if you want to, you can perform it. And yet, people don't seem to be disappearing when they perform the ritual. So what's all that about? How does the Rose Cross ritual make you invisible? We're going to talk about that. And the danger is, as usual, taking what I say literally and also missing the real value of what we're going to be going over here. The biggest benefit that this video will have is for those who have been studying Golden Dawn magic for a while, particularly in regard to the tetragrammaton, the pentagrammaton, and the analysis of the key word, and other mythic symbols like the Ankh and the cross. All right. So the obvious question is, what is the secret of invisibility? But let's turn that backwards so we can maybe understand it a little better. All right, so what's the secret of visibility? So the art of being unobtrusive would be the art of being sort of invisible. So if you're unobtrusive, you are kind of non-invasive, you're kind of off to the side, you're a wallflower, you're in the shadows. If you're obtrusive, you are loud, you are out in the center, dancing in the middle of the dance floor. That's obtrusive, okay? Almost like intrusive. So there's something about being unobtrusive. Some people are sort of cursed with it, being invisible. And they're passed over for promotions. They want to speak up and say something, and nobody's listening, and they'll be like, "Oh, I'm sorry, what? Were you saying something? Like, what? Yeah, like, really, you're not that important to me." Is kind of what they're saying when they, so there's something about you that's invisible, and some people have that sort of curse going on, and of course, somebody who masters magic, this is one of the major tricks of being able to shift back and forth between being unobtrusive and obtrusive, between being invisible and visible. This is something that actors can do because of something called method acting, and it's something that spies can do too. When I heard that Idris Elba was being considered for the part of James Bond, I didn't think he was that good a choice because he has such a striking appearance. And anybody who plays James Bond needs to be a sort of generic form of handsome, because James Bond needs to be able to stand out when he needs to be charming, but also he needs to be able to be unobtrusive and disappear into the background when he needs to do that as well. So let's talk about the art of being visible. Apparently, Marilyn Monroe had mastered the art of being visible. She actually tried to prove that at one point, and she apparently was very successful. She had a photographer accompany her on a train trip, on a subway trip, I believe, into the heart of New York. So she arrived at the central station, and I guess she had a suitcase and just was wearing ordinary clothes, and nobody noticed her, even though the photographer was with her. She went and purchased a ticket, and she got on the train, on subway, and nobody paid any attention. Nobody wanted her autograph. She was very famous at the time, and then they arrived in downtown New York, Manhattan, and she emerges from the subway, and she says, "Okay, now, do you want to see her? I'll show you Marilyn." And she just flipped her hair, struck a pose. Something different came over her, and suddenly people noticed her. First of all, she's very famous. She's an icon, but for some reason, she was not visible yet until she kind of made that little tweak. And you might say, well, what did she do physically to do that, to be so striking? Yes, there was definitely something physical involved. But really, the thing that makes it work is the subtlety of the internal visualization or the internal clicks that you do psychologically. You become another person. In other words, Norma Jean became Marilyn. So Norma Jean is invisible, and Marilyn Monroe is highly visible. That's a pretty good dramatic example of the power of visibility and invisibility. So if you want to be able to turn invisible, or you want to master the art of visibility, the principles involved are very magical, and they're kind of secret. So let's explore them. So yin, yang, and Tao. This is from Taoism. Fantastic spiritual discipline that's largely disappeared from the world now, and it's mainly a tourist trap. But there are Taoists still in the world. I'd like to consider myself one of them, but I'm not that much into the tradition, but I highly respect what's going on with it, at least in some of its original forms or older forms, maybe some of the newer forms too. And of course, in Taoism, we have the concepts of yin and yang, and the Tao itself, of course. And the yin-yang symbol is usually the way that we are invited to visualize yin and yang. The white fish that's sort of coming up, and the black fish that's sort of swooping down. The white one is the male principle, or the yang principle, and the black one is the yin principle. Okay, the light and the darkness. I believe that yin and yang originally came about when describing a hill. When the Chinese were doing geomancy in order to figure out, what a landscape should look like and build a house there and things like that. The yin side of the hill was the shadow side of the hill, and the yang side of the hill was the bright side of the hill. But that is not the best way to think of yin and yang. Okay, the nice takeaway here is that they interpenetrate each other, because you can see that the white yang has the yin penetrating into it with a black dot, and the yang has the and the yin has the yang penetrating into it. All right. Anyway, the only thing I would add to this a little bit further is that the darkness of yin contains within her the secret of invisibility, and the brightness of yang contains within himself the secret of visibility. And so the better way to see yin and yang is not like this. It's more in the terms of, if you think of a standing stone, a single standing stone like they have in Ireland or Scotland, that stone's sticking out of the ground, that's yang. Because the moment you see one of those, it's like, oh, what's that? It's very obtrusive. Okay, and it's also very phallic, male. Okay, so The yang principle stands out. It sticks out like a phallus. Okay, that's why it's the yang, the male principle. Okay. Now, when the male principle becomes invisible, it simply sinks back into the ground. Let's say that stone, if it wants to become invisible, it would just fall over and become part of the ground, or it would sink back into the ground, right? So it's still there, but we don't notice it anymore because it's no longer obtrusive. It has become unobtrusive and for all intents and purposes, invisible. Now, the same can be said for a human being, okay? Some of you who have been doing magic for a while can actually feel the phallic nature of the ego, the persona, how it sticks out. It juts out from the background. Here I am. Okay. Also, some of you who have done some street drugs might also have developed the sensation of how the ego actually is sort of like a sock puppet. It has a phallic nature to it. And it's no surprise that when you have too much of an ego that somebody might refer to you as a dickhead. Okay, because that ego becomes overpronounced, and egos are mainly associated with men because of that. Okay, and that's that sticking out aspect of the yang principle. And if that sinks back down back to where it came from, it just sinks back down into yin. Now, what that means is that the universal background behind everything you can see is yin. That's the feminine principle, supposedly, the principle of darkness or invisibility. And when something steps forth from that and says, "Here I am," it's yang. Because you can see it now. It's kind of like jutting out in a phallic sort of way. It's like, oh, it's almost poking your sphere of sensation and saying, "Here I am." Okay, so now this idea of penetration is going to be very important later on as we discuss invisibility. Okay. And so, we've talked about this in previous videos where, somebody's meditating and they have various complexes or demons that they have to confront. Each one of those demons is its own yang principle jutting out from the yin, from the back. It sticks out from the background of the psyche, comes forth and says, "Here I am. You need to do something about me because I have something to tell you and you're not listening." Okay. And the same thing goes for the person inside the magic circle, the guy meditating there. He also is a dickhead. Okay. He also has an ego, which the ultimate lesson for him here is that he can dissolve that ego and become invisible, and he can reconstitute it and become visible again. Okay. And the interesting thing is, so if he dissolves the ego, does he become truly invisible? No. But he does sort of blend in. And he has the ability to create a persona even more powerfully than somebody who hasn't mastered the back and forth between visibility and invisibility yet. So somebody like the Buddha would be able to disappear and be uninteresting, but then when it came time for him to speak, he would become very interesting. I've seen people do this. Some people have a knack for it. It is not a natural gift. It can be learned through method acting or through magic. It's the same thing that Marilyn Monroe was doing. She was shifting from the background from being a nobody to being somebody. To be adopting a persona. And an extremely visible one too, and a pretty one. All right, and so the idea of penetration. Okay, so if you look at the Egyptian Ankh on the left, that is in esoteric circles that everybody can recognize that the little loop up above and the crossbar and the loop combined is really simply the vagina, okay, almost like there's a woman sitting there with her legs spread. Don't want to be too graphic here, but and then the vagina's there, and then of course down below we have the phallus about to enter. Some versions of the Ankh show the phallus penetrating inside. Okay, and the same thing goes for the Christian cross. Yeah. So it's like the vertical shaft is the penetrating power of the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, and the horizontal bar of the cross represents manifestation, the two legs of the woman, essentially, right? And so we have this penetration going on here. Now, the penetration happens both ways. We have the power of God descending forth from the unmanifest, which is now spilling out of the goddess, being born as Jesus, right? Coming out of the vagina, becoming a someone, becoming visible, okay, which is now Yang principle, okay. And the idea that is if you go back into your mother, you die. In other words, your persona disappears back into the background. You become invisible. All these syllables come into play with this invisibility ritual. Okay, and it doesn't mean you can just draw them in the air and chant some words, and you're going to become invisible. As you can tell, there's something going on in Marilyn Monroe's imagination and in her psyche, so that she can facilitate that transformation. And of course, the key to that transformation is in these symbols. It's not like she learned these symbols. She may have just been a natural, or she may have learned them, some other way, possibly. But you can learn how to do this. And of course, magic is much more than just invisibility and visibility. This is just one trick. And in the Rose Cross ritual, we have various god names and formula used. The most prominent word of power used is Yeshua, which is sort of a Hebrew version of Jesus. Okay, and that's very important, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But also we do the analysis of the key word, INRI. So we have a 4-letter word, which is very important, and then we have some 3-letter words going on. And this brings in the mystery of 3 and 4. Okay, we've talked about these. This is INRI, which was tacked above the head of Jesus, supposedly, in the myth of the crucifixion, and it stands for Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. But it's a 4-letter word. It also stands for many other things in alchemy. Many meanings have been attached to it. It kind of represents the sacrificing of the 4 elements. Okay, now the sacrificing of them. So remember, Jesus is dying on the cross. He's becoming invisible. He's disappearing back into yin. He's the yang principle, but he's going to disappear back into yin eventually. And to help him do that, we have these 3-letter words like lux, light, and Yao, which is a ancient Gnostic name of God. And there's also the pentagrammaton, and this is one of the main words used in the Rose Cross ritual, Yeshua. Now, the tetragrammaton is 4 letters, and each letter represents one of the 4 elements. And of course, if you have the 4 elements going on, that's manifestation. That's very visible. Okay. But then we have the letter Shin, that sort of looks like a W there. It's descending down into the midst of them and sort of dissolving them. Okay, or it's kind of saying, it's coming in from behind them and basically saying, you don't exist. All that exists is the light of God, or something like that, right? So it's descending down into them and sort of breaking them up and showing that what's going on is just a combination of elemental forces. There's nothing intrinsically real happening here. Gosh, I hope that makes sense. if you were to regard yourself as nothing but a conglomeration of elements, let's say, oh, you're nothing but a bag of skin and various chemicals, right? Or you're nothing but an end result of a child upbringing and two parents who came together. There's nothing more to you than that. You'll never amount to anything. If you believe all that, if you're just the sum of your parts, you're going to be sort of invisible in a really ugly way. It's a really tragic way, because you'll never amount to anything because you can't be more than the sum of your parts. You can't be more than a bag of chemicals. Okay, that's one type of invisibility. Another type of invisibility is the kind that is illuminated, and so you disappear back into the background, but you have been transfigured now. It's another type of invisibility. And that second type of invisibility is the kind that the Rose Cross ritual supposedly is calling upon. And it's that descent of the letter Shin into the tetragrammaton, creating the pentagrammaton. And that descent of the letter Shin is reconciling the elements, but also really showing that there's really nothing going on. There's nothing intrinsic happening here except for spirit. And so all this fuss over the elements was unnecessary. And when you basically say nothing's really happening here, then it's like, oh, there's no entity here. So everything kind of just blends into the elements and becomes invisible because there's no intrinsic entity there at all. Okay, except for the spirit and the soul or whatever that's behind everything. Hard to explain that. Okay, so if you're nothing but the elements or nothing but a bag of chemicals, that's one way of being invisible. But if you can also disappear back into spirit, in which case that reveals that there really isn't anything going on amidst those elements. There really isn't any you. That's another way of becoming invisible. And yeah, well, those who have been doing this work for a while will probably be getting some big ahas, especially in a few moments. All right, so we have the mystery of the number 3 and the number 4. Remember INRI, and we have Yod He Vav He. And so you'll notice that the letter Shin has like 3 points, three flaming yods. 3 is very important to the yin principle and to spirit. Okay, so remember, yang comes forth from yin, becoming visible. When yang disappears back into yin, okay, he becomes invisible. He retreats back into pure potentiality. Okay, when that happens, when yang retreats back into yin, yin no longer exists either, because yin can only be conceived of as existing if yang is there. Okay, so when yang disappears back into yin, there is no yin anymore or yang. There's only Tao. Okay, you can't have a background without a foreground, without something in the foreground, right? And you can't have something in the foreground without a background. Right, remember, and just basically disappearing into yin, that is the secret of invisibility, supposedly. All right, so this symbol I give as kind of a secret glyph in my book called the Kabbalah Magic Book. And it's all about consecrating the Adeptus wand. This thing is kind of big, isn't it? And you can see, if I lean back a bit, you can see there are the 4 elements on this wand. There's the red, the blue, the yellow, and the green. It's fire, water, air, earth. And those of you who do Golden Dawn magic will recognize that the colors of the supernals are also in this wand, and they are white, gray, and black. The colors of the supernals. The supernals are the level of spirit. It's also the level of yin. It's the level of Saturn and the level of Bina, okay? And so this wand represents the 3-pronged nature of the spirit descending into the elements. Okay, and then even on the tip there is the letter Shin, which has got 3 prongs, right? And so we've got the supernals. We have Kether, Hakma, and Bina descending into the midst of the four elements. Okay, so you could call this the tetragrammaton wand, but it's actually a pentagrammaton wand. And I call it the Adeptus wand. Okay, and so the secret to the consecration of this wand I give in this symbol here. And that is the, you can see that Kether, Hakma, and Bina have come down into the midst of the elements. And if you would recall, for those of you who practice Golden Dawn magic, the four elements are at the bottom of the tree. And so you've got the supernals descending down into the four elements, or the four elements elevated up into the supernal influence. This is the penetrating power of spirit. It's very important for invocation work and for invisibility and for visibility. All right, so the Rose Cross, what is that? You probably have seen the Rose Cross. In fact, there is one on the cover of the Kabbalah magic book. Yes, I do have one copy. It's a cross with a rose on it, okay? And as you will recall, in the Egyptian Ankh, remember, it's a symbol of penetration into the vagina, or at least potentially anyway, or an emergence forth from the vagina, like as something's coming forth, like, a baby, like the child Horus or Jesus. And so it's not too hard to see that the rose in the center of the cross is also vaginal, okay? And you can see the blooming rose would represent the power of manifestation, something coming forth into visibility. Anything that goes into the rose disappears, becomes invisible. Anything that comes out of the rose appears and becomes visible. Some people would say that, well, if it goes into the rose, it's destroyed, right? It's no longer manifest. Well, no, it's no longer manifest on this plane, but it still exists. It's invisible. All right. And the interesting thing about this version of the Rose Cross is you've got something going on. You've got the tetragrammaton on the outside, which is the four elements. That's the visible aspect of the universe. And then you've got a pentagrammaton going on the inside. How interesting. Oh. And the letter Aleph, very interesting in the middle there. Wonder what that represents. And there's something very important about the corners of that cross. All right. So in other words, did I get that right? The corners. Like in other words, we have instead of the north, south, east, and west, we have the northeast, southeast, and so on. Those corners. Okay. There are roses coming out of there. What's going on? Okay, here we have the rose in the center. This is the rose cross that the Golden Dawn still uses. And, okay, so what you'll notice is that in those corners of the cross, between the arms, you've got I, N, R, I. You've also got LVX, and you've got EAO. And it's a little bit clumsy too, because EAO is, you've got sort of those, four spikes coming from between the armpits of the cross, essentially, right? Those corners. And you have, but then you have the three-letter words are also represented there. So it gets a bit clumsy because it's LVXX. Interesting, LVXX. If you might recall, the Tetragrammaton also has a superfluous letter, Yud He, Vav He. And that awkwardness of the number 4 kind of indicates that something has spilled out into reality, stumbled out into reality, become manifest and visible. So shifting from 4 to 3 means you're withdrawing something. You're withdrawing some kind of projected persona, and just dissolving into the elements again. Okay. All right. And so there's something very important about these, diagonal rays of power in the northeast, southeast, northwest, southwest. Okay. They're emerging, sort of interceding between the elements. And so when you do the rose cross ritual, instead of drawing magical symbols in the east, south, west, and north, you draw them between those quarters as though you are separating the elements from each other with holy crosses, symbols of spirit, right? So the idea is that spirit is being opened up. And this is why the Rose Cross ritual is given in the portal grade in my Kabbalah magic book, because once you're in the portal grade, you've been through the elemental grades, you've been initiated into each element, and those elements are supposedly functioning as a unity now. And now it's time to open them up with spirit. And so we have this symbol, the Maltese cross, is a graphic symbol of the elements now revealed as separate entities. This is an important symbol, really, especially in the portal grade, but it's attempting to show that in the outward appearance of the world, there really isn't any intrinsic entity there that you would try to impose upon whatever's there. It's just saying there's just elements, okay? Whatever is uniting these principles is just, pure light or pure invisible radiance. And so to separate them out is to show that there is really nothing there other than just the elements, and that spirit is simply participating on a higher plane from an invisible plane. All right, so apparently you might wonder, how is it possible to put all this stuff together and make the Rose Cross ritual into a ritual of invisibility? I've already given the keys to that, and you can see that this whole idea of emergence from the invisible background, that's becoming visible, right? And disappearance into the background becoming invisible, unobtrusive, okay? And so there's this whole idea of the spiritual influx coming down into the four elements of you and dissolving any false notion that there's actually any entity there holding it all together. Because that's what the ego is. It's trying to hold it all together. And when the ego dies, it all falls apart, or so you think. But then, of course, well, the elements, they keep running, don't they? They keep working. But now you don't hold on to any illusions of the ego having any intrinsic reality. Okay. And when that happens, yeah, that's invisibility. It's like, oh, I've disappeared into the invisible. But now that I know that I don't exist, I can re-emerge and create a new persona. And some artists do this. Those who have mastered the art of visibility and invisibility, they dissolve their old personas and then they reinvent themselves and come out in a new form. Okay, so there's a little mantra you can do along with the Rose Cross ritual if you like. It is, I am nothing, I am no one, I do not exist. Okay, you could do that right after the Rose Cross. Okay. The interesting thing about the tetragram or the pentagrammaton, there in the last video I talked about an active and a passive form. You can see, if you remember that video, there is another form of the Pentagrammaton that would basically be the active form. And what you could probably gather is the active form could be used for making you visible. But it's not just a matter of chanting that word and something's going to happen. It's more that when you've worked with the principle behind the elements and the unifying spirit or the dissolving spirit, then the true principles of invisibility become possible for you to master. So the art, most people want to be visible, right? Funny thing is, Aleister Crowley wanted to master the art of invisibility, and he claims to have been able to do it to some degree, but I really don't think he could have. Being a classic narcissist, narcissists are compulsively visible all the time. I don't know if he ever really wanted to disappear. Don't know. But as you've seen, maybe there's that footage of Donald Trump pushing other diplomats out of the way so he could be at the front, because it's very important to be visible, right? I need to be at the forefront. I need to be standing out. I need to be obtrusive. That's his main talent, is being visible. Being invisible is not in the cards for him. It's not in the trumps for him. But so naturally, to master the arts of manifestation and unmanifestation, it pays not to be a narcissist, because it also pays to be invisible sometimes when it's needed, and to become visible at other times. All right, until next time.